appoggia! Rete! Mandzukic prova! Rete! No, l'avete detto!
The Champions League as we have it today is nothing like what it was decades ago, and unlike what you might have thought, it wasn't born out of a master plan. As a matter of fact, the birth of the Champions League was very spontaneous. The concept of the Champions League became a thing in 1954, although this was not the year it was born. A need for the Champions League arose when English club Wolverhampton Wanderers went against Honvéd, a Hungarian team. This match ended in favor of Wolverhampton Wanderers. Due to this, pressmen from England referred to Wolverhampton Wanderers as the champions of the world. The match between Wolverhampton Wanderers and Honvéd was perhaps the first set of matches between clubs from different countries. So the English club, emerging victorious, put them in good light in the football community in Europe. But the interesting thing is that this match was in the Metropa Cup.
Within 10 minutes, they opened the scoring through Koksic,
which wasn't of any significance and featured only a couple of teams. As insignificant as the competition was, a certain Hungarian reporter, Gabriel Hanna, wasn't comfortable with the picture the English press was painting. He could have decided to start a war of words, but that wasn't what he did. Rather, he called for a proper competition that would involve the best clubs from the various leagues in Europe. And that was how the Champions League was born in 1955. But it wasn't even called the Champions League until much later. It was actually known as the European Cup. More of this in a moment, but in the meantime, please smash that like and share button. Also, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our videos. Now, the Champions League has gone through lots of changes, and if there is something constant with the Champions League, it is change. At its inception, only 16 teams made it to the party. Additionally, there was no group stage, no penalty, and no extra time. The teams went straight into the knockout, and if there was no winner after an encounter, the teams involved had to have a replay. Additionally, unlike the Champions League as we know it today, the European Cup wasn't lucrative, so teams basically played for passion and not for financial rewards. The first European Cup was played in the 1955-56 season, and Real Madrid, the biggest team in the Champions League, won it. As beautiful as winning the maiden edition of the Champions League was, the Los Blancos were obviously not satisfied. They wanted a lot more, so for the next 4 years, Madrid were busy winning the European Cup. The implication of this is that they won the first 5 European Cups. With this, it is obvious Madrid did not become
Benzema, la mette dentro! È tutto regolare, incredibile errore! Lovren riesce a schiacciare, attenzione alla rete! Rete! Ma le ha pareggiato!
The most successful club in Europe recently. This is a position they've occupied since the beginning of European competitions. One could say Madrid were lucky to have won the first 5 editions of the European Cup, but they didn't actually depend on luck. They had Puskas and Alfredo Di Stefano, who are some of the best players in Europe. So dominating Europe wasn't so difficult. Other clubs in Europe weren't exactly comfortable with the fact that Madrid were dominating, but there wasn't much they could do until Benfica became strong enough to displace Madrid from the top. After displacing Madrid, Benfica went on to hold on to the European Cup for 2 seasons. These wins didn't come easy, as they had to go through serial winners Real Madrid and Spanish giants Barcelona in the finals. The next 3 years saw Inter Milan and AC Milan dominate Europe. One reason for the Italian dominance was the ability of Italian clubs to defend excellently. Although Italian teams had their time in Europe, it was quite short-lived as Madrid were back with another win. Real Madrid did so well in the European Cup because of the presence of Puskas and Alfredo Di Stefano. So with these guys leaving the scene, Madrid became a lot less dominant. The era of Madrid dominating the European Cup was over for a while, but that wasn't all. New rules were introduced to the European Cup. Penalties became a part of the competition. This meant the days of possible replays were over. Well, that's not all. Extra time and away goals became part of the rules. Between 1955, when the European Cup started, and 1966, no British club conquered Europe. Even Wolverhampton Wanderers, which initially got hyped as the best club in the world, didn't come close to winning the European Cup.
They expected the even Super Bowl players of Barcelona would go away humbled. What a hope.
The early bombardment of the Wolves' goal was the shape of things to come.
But this changed in 1967 when Scotland's Celtic won the European Cup. This cup spent an extra year on British soil as Manchester United achieved European glory for the first time ever. Although this was special because it was the first time a team from England was winning the European Cup, it was even more of a big deal because some years before winning the European Cup, the Manchester United squad got involved in a plane crash. This meant they literally rebuilt their square and were at the top in a couple of years. Just like Madrid, which had Alfredo Di Stefano and Puskas to thank for their European success, Bobby Charlton and George Best played a major role in United's European Cup success. The next couple of years after United won the European Cup were dominated by Feyenoord and AC Milan, but their dependence didn't last long as Bayern and Ajax came on the scene with a bang. Although Ajax and Bayern Munich came on the scene about the same time, Bayern actually needed to wait in line until Ajax were done shining. The Dutch club had one of the best players of all time on their team. This man, known as Johan Cruyff, led the Dutch Giants to 3 consecutive European Cup successes. Beyond being a great player, Cruyff birthed a style of play that opponents found difficult to cope with. So while the opponents were busy trying to understand what he was up to, Ajax were busy winning. After Ajax were done winning the European Championship 3 years in a row, Bayern Munich took over. The Germans were able to dominate Europe because they just didn't concede lots of goals. Their defense was watertight, so they basically defended and scored using the counter. At this point in the European Cup, apart from Manchester United winning it once, England was yet to make it to the party, but the English teams were just around the corner because for the next 6 years after Bayern's reign, it was an all-English party. Liverpool won their first European Cup in 1977, but they clearly were not satisfied with just one win, so they made it. The football community would expect to conquer Europe, but it's interesting how Nottingham Forest won the European Cup back-to-back. Liverpool probably took a cue from Nottingham Forest and won it a third time. To do this, they had to go through Real Madrid in the final. Next to the party was Aston Villa, and that was it with the English winning streak in the European Cup. This winning streak was over, but Liverpool were not done winning yet. Hamburg ended the winning streak. English clubs were beginning to build, but Liverpool decided to grab one more European Cup victory. Liverpool were able to win 4 European Cups out of 8. This made it obvious that they were a dominant team in Europe, but their unruly fans brought an end to their dominance. At some point in the European Cup, the fans were beginning to act unruly, and these bad occurrences were more prevalent in England than in any other European nations. Well, everything came to an end in a match between Juventus and Liverpool. The Liverpool fans left the section created for them and crossed into the section designed for the Juve fans. This led to a brawl that cost a number of lives and injured a lot more. Although this brawl could have led to the end of the match, UEFA let the match continue even after a section of the stadium collapsed. Although things were already bad, they weren't so bad for the old ladies as they conquered Europe for the first time. After this match, UEFA knew that if they didn't do something about hooliganism among the fans, it wasn't going to stop. Due to this, Liverpool got banned for 6 years, while other English clubs received a 5-year ban. This action significantly affected hooliganism, but that wasn't all it did. It affected the momentum that clubs from England were beginning to build. With the English clubs out of the way, new clubs were free to rise to the top, and the first club that took advantage of this was Steaua from Romania. They beat Barcelona in the final on penalties and are the first and only club from Eastern Europe to win the European Cup. The next 2 European Cups went to Porto and PSV. Although underdog stories are interesting, AC Milan ended the party for the underdogs as they went on to win back-to-back titles. Well, the underdogs were not giving up as Belgrade got their share of the spoils. The year was 1992, and Barcelona, which is considered one of the biggest clubs in Europe today, was yet to win the European Cup. However, that was about to change as Johan Cruyff, who was popular for his total football philosophy, was back. But not as a player, he was back as a coach and was in charge of Barcelona. He led the Catalans to victory. Barcelona were somewhat lucky to have won the European Cup in 1992. This is because the European Cup got rebranded and became the Champions League that we still call it today. There are quite a couple of reasons why the Champions League got rebranded. Chief among these reasons is that the UEFA was looking to make it more competitive. One way this tournament became more competitive was that it now had a group stage. With this, there were more games. But that's not all. The ban on England was lifted. The return of the English teams to Europe was good news for football, and England in particular. Sadly, at this point, the teams from Italy had made Europe their background. So getting back to winning ways was an uphill task for teams from England. Before the Champions League, teams from France were yet to make a mark in England. However, that soon ended. Marseille won the first edition of the Champions League, and that was it for France. Marseille beat Milan in the 1993 final, but Milan were not backing down. They beat Barcelona to win the Champions League in 1994. They were dethroned by Ajax in 1995, who in turn left the seat for the old ladies, who were used to losing in the final. After winning in 1996, the old ladies again lost in the Champions League final, this time to the German side Borussia Dortmund. After Dortmund conquered Europe in 1997, there was yet another change to the Champions League. You see, prior to 1998, only one team from each country could play in the Champions League. Lots of top clubs in Europe were not comfortable with this arrangement, and this led to rumors of a Super League being formed. Although it didn't quite seem like there was a concrete plan for a Super League, UEFA's response to this rumor was an increase in the number of teams in the Champions League from 16 to 32. Obviously, this made the Champions League bigger. There were more matches, more goals, and more money, of course. The new Champions League format would last all the way to 2024. As a fresh format will be implemented in 2025. We will see more of this later. But this is a perfect time to subscribe to the channel if you're new here. Just like Madrid won the first ever European Cup and dominated Europe for the next 5 years, after the Champions League format changed, the Los Blancos were dominant for 6 years. Although they didn't win at all through these years, they conquered Europe in 3 out of 6 years. From their defense through their midfield, and United were able to win the Champions League in 1999. They scored 2 late goals to beat German champions Bayern Munich. The Champions League was quite uneventful until 2004, when the special one took underdogs Porto to the Champions League final and won convincingly. This was the beginning of a new Champions League era, although Mourinho never won the Champions League again until 2010. His victory with Porto made him a force in Europe. It was 2005 and Mourinho was looking to head to the finals, this time with Chelsea. Sadly, Liverpool stood in his way of winning the Champions League back-to-back. Well, after defeating Mourinho's Chelsea, Liverpool went on to face Milan in the final. At the time, Milan were considered favorites to win, and it very much seemed like they were going to walk over Liverpool easily, as they were already 3 goals up after 45 minutes. But Liverpool shocked Europe when they made a comeback that no one saw coming. They scored 3 goals in the second half, dragging this match to extra time and then penalties. In the end, Liverpool won the Champions League. They tried snatching the cup from AC Milan 2 years later, but this time the Italians were smarter. But before this happened, Barcelona beat Arsenal in the Champions League final. Arsenal went ahead, got an early red card, and their keeper got sent off, and that was the beginning of the end for them. They could not deal with the pressure from the Catalans that ended up losing this match by 2-1. It was 2008, and Chelsea and Manchester United were 2 of the biggest clubs in Europe. And for the first time in the Champions League, Europe saw an all-English final. CR7 got the Red Devils ahead with a header. But when it looked like it was going to be United's day, Lampard equalized for Chelsea. The game went into extra time through penalties, and Ronaldo, who was supposed to be was going to be an all-English final. Interestingly, it appeared the two clubs involved in the 2008 final would be going head-to-head again in 2009. The biggest robbery in Champions League history. Chelsea were on their way to facing United in the final, but were stopped by Barcelona with the help of the referee. The Catalans went on to beat United by 2-0 in the final. A year later, the Special One won his second Champions League trophy. This was followed by Barcelona beating United in another final. Messi was on fire, and the United defense didn't have an answer to what he brought to the game. Chelsea were yet to win the Champions League, but in 2012 they joined the class of Champions League winners, and they went through one of the most difficult routes. They qualified ahead of Barcelona and ended up beating Bayern Munich in Germany, but Bayern redeemed themselves by conquering Europe in 2013. It was 2014 and Real Madrid had not won the Champions League in over a decade. The last time they won the Champions League was 2002, and they were tired of waiting. They had gathered some of the best players from across Europe. They even had Kaká and Ronaldo, two Ballon d'Or winners, on one team. This combo, 3 more goals from Ronaldo, Marcelo, and Bale, gave Madrid the cup for the 10th time. The Los Blancos were back to dominating Europe and would go on to appear in the semi-final final for the next 4 years. A year after they won their 10th Champions League, they got knocked out by Juventus in the semi-final. The old ladies were close to winning the Champions League, but they found a way to live up to expectations as the Champions League final losers. Although they had a reputation for losing in the Champions League final, winning Barcelona with the most potent attack trio of Messi, Suarez, and Neymar was going to be difficult. Barcelona won the last Champions League in 2015, and Europe saw Madrid finish at the top in 2016, 17, and 18. Conquering years in a row. Madrid beat Liverpool in the 2018 final after Ramos injured Salah, and the Liverpool goalie made 2 schoolboy mistakes. Well, Liverpool were down but not out as they won the Champions League the next year. This was an all-English final, and surprisingly, Tottenham made it to the final after working over Ajax in the semi-final. The Champions League almost came to France in 2020. PSG actually had a great time, but Bayern took their chance and were able to lift this trophy. Chelsea and Madrid won the next 2 years, and 2023 was Manchester City's year. Just a couple of years ago, Manchester City were not considered a big team in Europe. As a matter of fact, they weren't even a big team in England, but when they finally won the Champions League, they seemed overdue, as they had been consistent in the Champions League for a couple of years before getting a well-deserved victory. Well, the 2024 Champions League is on, and we just might have a repeat of 2013, where we saw a German club rule over Europe, but Madrid just might decide to stand in the way of that and win their 15th Champions League trophy. So, who do you think will win the Champions League this year, Madrid or Dortmund? Kindly let us know in the comment section below. Also, please subscribe to the channel before moving on, and don't forget to watch the video on the screen.